I have returned to Oregon Shakespeare Festival as an employee for the 2022 season as a production assistant. It's the job I lost when the pandemic hit, so I'm super happy to be back. I arrived here fully committed to live out of my box van and figure out how to park in and around the city areas near my job. I was pretty much used to it, and I didn't see a point in not being at home when I have the option, since it's on wheels. But the neighbor of a festival employee actually offered me the chance to park in a back parking pad. It's perfect, I fit, and they've even given me power. Honestly, it's more than I could ask for. But in general, I notice most people have negative stereotypes attached to being static, doing a job, and living in a van. So I thought we should discuss it. So in this video, we are going to be talking about working a city location-based job while doing van life. The funny thing is, van lifers are often known as slackers who don't want to work and just want to live in a van down by the river. They're bums, they're dirty. If they are not down by the river, they are hanging on the corner of your street and they are not moving. The stereotype is a lot of things that are seen as negative, if not seen as something to be pitied, especially if they are city-dwelling van dwellers. And that's because van life in the city is seen as homelessness, not by situation of van dweller, but by default of situation. This ignores the fact that there is a good amount of city van dwellers who work day jobs that are just living the exact life they want to live. And the reason they aren't noticed is because they aren't the ones hanging out in the same spot all day. They can't. They're at work. And they drove their van there. An amazing example of this is Anthony of Life with Anthony, who moved into his SUV with financial goals in mind while having a full-time commitment to the same job he had while he was living in an apartment. And another is Maddie Van Halen, who is traveling now but started his van life as a van dweller with a location-based employment and worked in that position while living in a van until it made sense to transition away from it. But in general, those who escape the dirty van dweller stereotype, I see you, Pamela, tend to be the fancy van dwellers in decked out Sprinter vans or high-end builds who can apparently hop all over the country spending money like crazy. A lot of the time, this is seen as the way to do van life, and anything that's not that isn't real van life. So what a lot of people seek in order to achieve this location-independent life is location-independent work, such as a digital job. One of which might be starting a YouTube channel. And despite what people think about this not being work, it takes a lot of work to maintain and turn profit on a YouTube channel that you can live on exclusively without support from other sources of income. Very few people actually pull it off at the high end. But even for non-YouTube digital or online work, there's options that may include a more traditional paycheck and vacation days and vacation pay. It is entirely possible. My friend Sarah is one of those people. I did a video with her about her transition into digital work and linked websites she recommended as good job search options for that digital work. But what this video is about is not the digital work, but static work, and working static work while living van life. And knowing I wanted to do this video, I posted a poll that said, would you ever do van life while having a location-based job in the city? Out of 928 votes, 76% said yes, and 24% said no, which is interesting. I expected more kickback on this and less people that were interested in it. So let's look at some of the comments and respond to some of those. Now, there were a lot of people who were just downright enthusiastic after I asked this question. They either were like, yeah, I'm doing it now, or they talked about the fact that they have done it in the past or they are planning on doing it. And that was kind of exciting to see, because the truth is you don't have to give up your day job to start a transition into van life. It is not a requirement to get rid of your day job. So even with all the enthusiastic replies, I do have to acknowledge some people legitimately don't like the idea of being stuck in a single location while they are working. For example, Van Granny says, doing it now, and I hate that I feel like I'm shackled to it. 2.5 months to go. So obviously Van Granny, thank you for the comment, is not happy in the career that she's in or the job that she's in. So obviously, if you're not happy where you are and you're trying to move on to something else, whatever form that something else takes, you're not going to be excited about keeping the job you have because it does not feel worth it. And that's a legitimate way to feel. JBaby007 JBaby007 says, I need to be able to travel, so I couldn't settle on a location-based job. And this is understandable. If you have an intense goal around travel, and I'm talking about the kind of travel you just can't bottle into like weekends or vacation days, and like that is your goal, you have not seen things, there are things you want to see, I see a location-based job feeling like the antithesis of your goals for getting into van life, and that's a completely valid way to feel. Now I would like to say there are some location-based jobs that aren't based in the same location all the time. For example, travel nursing, like that's the one that just pops in my head. Like a lot of people do travel nursing because it allows them to use work as a method for travel. And I had a job a long time ago. I'll talk about it some more in this video when I talk a little bit more about different types of location-based work and sort of the positives and negatives of those types of work when it comes to van life. But I had a job where occasionally, a long time ago, pre-van life, I got to travel on occasion. Now, it was not big travel. It was a couple states over from where I was. But I love those situations. Like, it was like the best thing ever, just to be able to go somewhere new and be there, even if I was training for a job. I did not really mind it and have never really minded if my travel was sort of linked into working or going somewhere for the explicit reason of doing a job. It was still always exciting to me as opposed to having to be stuck in one place. So I really do get what JBaby007, every time I say that I want to smile because I just think about James Bond. But I do get what JBaby007 is saying about I need to be able to travel, so I couldn't do a location-based job. But I also think you can find creative ways to satisfy the travel bug and still have a job, rather that's digital work or a location-based job with some travel involved. And my cat is knocking my mic right now. There are also a lot of positive responses to location-based work and different types of location-based work. For example, RMN Peace and Love, I love these, said, yes, I've done it, but not stealth camping. 17 miles from town where I got work was a state park. Primitive camping, free, with access to state park facilities if you have an annual state park pass. New Mexico. So this is sort of what I like to call one of those borderline positions, which is if you find a position at like a state park or some sort of facility that provides camping or has access to camping. So yeah, and there are short-term commitments like this, long-term commitments like this. And for people who want to be around nature, this can be like the greatest thing ever. You work in a place where you can camp. So literally the second off work, you just have a free campsite. And in the meantime, as long as you don't hate the work, you're also getting paid. Hugs and Guns and Things says, if you work in the entertainment business, I agree with this. It can be such a way to get, it's such a great way to get extra rest. And I completely agree with this. There have been several times where I've worked for a theater where I stayed in the parking lot. There were showers on site and other resources I could use on site, and I did not have to commute as much as the cast and the rest of the creative team, because I could just stay there for the run of the show or the rehearsal process or whatever. I could literally get off work and go straight to bed. My cat keeps hitting my mic for at the end of the night, and they were contemplating their commutes home while I was not. So that was really, really great for me. Depending on what kind of work you do in the entertainment field, either as an entertainer or crew or management or whatever, if there is some kind of travel involved, certainly having a drivable house you can take to a location. Now, there's going to be situations if you get, you know, big enough up the tree, which maybe I will be one day, maybe I never will, where you might have to fly, and then you might have to get housing or hotel once you get there. But having the option to just drive a house there and have a house on site for breaks or whatever is really great. What I loved last week, before I moved into the spot I am in now, which is like a 10-minute walk from the theater, like I was walking outside every day, going back to my box truck and making my lunch. I didn't go out to buy it, so I'm saving money that way. I had to get there early to make sure I had a parking spot, and that was getting exhausting really quickly just because of the size of my vehicle. But I was legally parked. As soon as we had a break, I went outside, I made myself some lunch, and then I went back in. And yeah, it was just great. It was super convenient. Like, I am sure, like, at the end of the day, I was getting a little exhausted in the morning just because of this particular situation. But at the end of the day, like, I could just go lay down and stay where I was. And so that was very, very nice. But it's not as nice as some of my other situations where I was literally able to swing just staying on site completely. So once I, you know, started, I drove massively twice. My first day and my last day. And that was it. Because otherwise I just stayed there. My son's mother says, I did stealth camping in the city before it was even a thing. Over 20 years ago. Worked a professional job wearing business clothing. And so, yeah, there you go. And like we tend to think we only have access to these, you see, you know, van dwellers who have a job as laborers. And there's nothing wrong with laborers, but, you know, as long as you can get clean, you can put on a business suit and go on into work, and you're saving all the money of having an apartment. Now, it does take, again, a special kind of person to do this because you don't have access to all the conveniences of an apartment, depending on what you're living in. But like, once you get used to it, honestly, it's not that big of a deal. That first initial, like first few months, depending on sort of your tolerances and the adjustments you need to make, it might be a little bit tough. But once you get used to it, it just gets normalized for you. So you're not thinking about sort of it as much because it's just your new normal, and you're not thinking about how different it was in an apartment. Like, you get to a point where you don't really miss it because you don't know any different. It's just your life. Francine's Joy brings up a good point. It says the issue would be pets and air conditioning and finding places to park. But if I could live in an area where I didn't need air and I had a place for my pets, then yes. Because then I could get my debt paid off because I wouldn't have a rent payment. And for a lot of people, this is sort of the clutch. It's the idea of eliminating the rent payment. It's not about big travel. It's not about using gas to spin across the country as fast as you can. It's about eliminating that rent payment or that mortgage payment or those bills that are specifically attached to the house, because a lot of the times you also have the vehicle bills anyway, and so you're just slimming yourself down to just those vehicle bills. Now, if you do have a pet, it can provide complications depending on where you live and what sort of extreme conditions you might face in the area you live in. Now, I did not have a pet at the beginning of my van life. Since then, I've had one. Luckily, most of the time, where I've had to leave the vehicle to do some sort of job, rather it be a contractual obligation or like some job I picked up for a day. I've never had to have Mickey be that far away, or in a situation where I couldn't access him, or in a situation where I was worried about extreme conditions. I do put him first. I will not do anything that would put him in danger just to earn $1. That is not something I will do. There was always some other opportunity out there. But like when I was stage managing for Oakland Theater Project, like he was in the parking lot. I could get to him. And we were rehearsing outside. So I knew what it felt like outside. So there was never a situation where he had to be in the vehicle alone for hours of the day, inaccessible to me. So there are compromises to the whole pet situation, but if you have a pet going into van life, you know, and that's a whole different subject that I also have a poll up about, and I will be doing a video about. But if you do have a pet, there are certain considerations that you have to think about, because pets are basically kids who can't go people places. So if you had a human child and you were living in the city, you would be sending that child off to school probably during the day, or you could put them in daycare. Now you can do the same thing with a pet, but that is an extra expense. So that is something to think about. There are doggy daycares that will take dogs or cats or animals during the day, and especially with dogs, even more so than other pets, you know, they'll walk them, they'll play, they'll interact with other dogs during the day, and you'll have to pick them up. But much like daycare for a child, that is an additional expense, and you have to decide if it's worth it. If you used to be able to like leave your dog at home and they had access to a yard during the day, maybe they have a doggy door, maybe they don't, maybe they had a dog walker that came by. But this is something you would really have to consider if you had a pet and you wanted to do urban van life. Like, am I in a situation where either I can take the animal with me to work, or I'm willing to pay for a pet sitter, or I have somebody that can take my animal during the day, or conditions are safe enough in the situation I live in that my pet will be okay for however many hours I have to be at work. It doesn't necessarily need to be an 8-hour day. The question was just about location-based work, not necessarily location-based work that's full-time. So maybe you'd have to make that compromise and you only did like part-time work at night. And so if you're working at night, that's usually relatively mild conditions, unless like you're in freezing conditions. Usually if it's hot, nighttime is like the best time. Like for me, as it cools off in the evening, that's a great time for me to go to the store, because I'm less worried about Mickey being in the truck by himself. And the same logic, like if you're working at night, in the heat, night conditions are usually better. In the cold, that's usually when things freeze, even if they were, you know, warm during the day. So there's a lot of things to think about, basically, if you have an animal. But I think people who love their pets, those are their children, and so they are going to think about that. And they're not going to take anything that would put that animal in danger. I'm not sure how to say this, but AY Not 8 says, maybe in a small town, but I am definitely not a big city girl. And this is a good caveat to make. When I say location-based work in the city, there are different sizes of city. Like Ashland is, where I am now, is very small. Like it is not San Francisco. So having location-based work in some place like Ashland is definitely not the same as having location-based work in San Francisco. And even San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley, which I used to float between in the San Francisco Bay Area, are very different places. So if I had a job obligation that took me, you know, to San Francisco, it was a way huger think about if I can do this situation than if I had a job obligation in Berkeley, which I felt a little more familiar with, and how to park and where to park. I felt a little better about that. And there were even some times I needed to go down to San Jose, which honestly most of the time actually worked out. Like I had pretty good luck, like parking and staying in San Jose when I had to park down there. And so size of town, mood of town, sort of where it falls in the spectrum between big city and small town is going to have a big impact on your ability to work a location-based job while not living in traditional sticks and bricks housing. So that was a good comment. I like that one. And so now we're going to take a comment from Ramona Hopewell to kind of wrap up comments. And she says, I still love working in the hospital, but I want to start saving money. I want to buy a cargo trailer to build out. So it's not that she hates her job or even wants to leave it at this current time, but she would like a situation that allows her to save more money and work towards her dream of building out a cargo trailer. And so there might be a situation where that could work out for somebody. Now, the thing about a cargo trailer is obviously it's a towable, and having a towable in the city or any type of urban environment where you will have to move frequently, unless you have somebody's yard where they're like, hey, you can hang out here, you can build your vehicle, you know, or once it's built out, you could like stay here in it. Maybe you can work out some sort of situation like that, and that would be fine. I know a guy in San Francisco who lives in a trailer, but he lives in an intentional living community where there's a bunch of tiny house-like things. I don't know his exact situation. We only talked casually because we were joking about RVs, because he was talking about all the stuff he pulled out that he didn't need because it was just him and his dog. And RVs are basically built for family travel, so it's about everything that you can turn into a bed. Like, this thing flips out and it's a bed, and this thing, it sleeps four and does this and does that. Like, that's a big selling point for RVs. And he's like, I'm just one guy and a dog, I don't need all that. And so, like, we were joking about that whole sort of nature of RVs to sort of brag about how many beds you can pull out of a wall to store children in. And so we started joking about it. So he had a situation in a city environment where he was living a much cheaper life out of a trailer. Like I said, I don't know his whole situation because we were just talking casually, and then we figured out we were both sort of in this alternative lifestyle, and that was back when I was in Berkeley. So on Ramona Hopewell's comment, there you go. Like, her dream is to build out a cargo trailer, and she would like to save money, and she doesn't hate her job. Like, she has no big missions, unlike, you know, the earlier commenter, to get away from her job, but she would like the money saving aspects of not having to pay rent as she pursues her dream to build out a cargo trailer. And if I've misinterpreted that comment in any way, Ramona, just let me know. I would say most van dwellers do recognize the need to have income while doing van life. Vehicles need parts, maintenance, fuel. Owning a vehicle is an ongoing expense, but it's an expense many have in addition to household bills, and not as their only bill. And for many urban-based van dwellers, that's the win. In addition to vehicle bills, you're going to need to eat, you might get sick or have ongoing medical expenses for existing conditions, and traditional work is just location based. The biggest pool of work available, even in the digital age, is still location based. I think when people hear location based, they think that means a sacrifice of travel. But does it have to be? Let's talk for a minute about some of the options that are location based. First of all, there's the gig economy. And by gig economy, I mean Uber, DoorDash, Lyft, Postmates, Amazon Flex, Blue Crew, Winolo, Wag, Rover. There are so many gig economy apps, and new ones are appearing every day. The good thing about these economy apps is that you can do them at your leisure. No one controls how much you work or not. Some of them will cross state borders for you, some of them won't. The ones that do cross borders, you can use to pick up a little bit of extra money here and there. If you're trying to build a business and you just need some band-aid cash to fill in some gaps, sometimes these are the greatest gift of the digital age. You're not going to get rich doing it, but if you need some supplemental income or gas money or just need to earn a little extra cash every once in a while, they do help. I say if you are going to do any gig economy work, try a few apps. Don't dedicate yourself to one. Nothing is universally true. In some areas, you can make bank doing something like DoorDash. In other areas, it might not be worth it and more profitable to do something like Instacart instead. I've met a lot of people who have loved DoorDashing. I absolutely hated it, and I actually liked Amazon Flex better, but you won't know what works for you until you try a few. The good thing is the flexibility of these apps really do allow you to pick them up and do them at your leisure. And there's no boss to request time off from when you don't want to work or you just want to travel. However, there's also no benefits involved, and almost all of these apps are independent contractor, which means you are responsible for taxes not applied to your income. You need to be as smart about tracking expenses when you're doing these apps as any other freelancer or self-employed person. You have no benefits, no health insurance, no 401k. I think these apps can be a useful tool to fill in income gaps, but you can also run yourself and your vehicle into the ground if you rely too heavily on them as your sole income. You also can't do Lyft in a car that's been modified, and you can only do Uber Eats and not Uber People if you no longer have all the seats in your car. So there are some limitations you'll hit in certain styles of vehicles and certain builds. I prefer labor-based apps where I work at a baseball stadium for a day, or worked a festival for a day, or even worked a warehouse job for a few days. I like these way more than apps where I drove around all day burning gas in my car for not nearly enough money. Which brings me to day gigs and or short-term gigs. I've gotten a lot of my day gigs on recommendation or based on past work experience. For a long time, for example, I was a periodic pet sitter, and it was great. I did start off through apps like Wag and Rover, but after working for some of these folks, a few of them hired me or recommended me to friends outside of the app, which turned into all profit for me. The greatest thing about pet sitting early in my van life was staying in a house. I'd stay in a house for a week or two and still be able to do other work sometimes, like stage manage a show. As long as the dog got walked and pets got fed and the proper amount of loving happened. It's something I couldn't do now because I have my own pet. But when I didn't have a pet, it allowed me to have a ton of furry friends in my life without the full responsibility of pet ownership. And I got paid for it. Before I left for RTR this past year, I did a day gig for a company that does drone light shows. And I was just an assistant there to help position and fetch drones. And even though I got that job through Blue Crew, what it led to was a follow-up job with the guy who ran the drone company, who was trying to build out a van, not to travel in so much as to have something to transport the drones in that he owned so he wouldn't have to rent anymore. So I did a bunch of renovations on his van. I pulled out some storage shelves he didn't want. I added a ladder. I had added some grates to the window. I installed his roof racks. I did a bunch of little work for him, and he paid me for it. Also based on my past work, I picked up a day gig doing some lighting at a small theater in Oakland. And on a number of occasions, I have collected work from recommendations based on past work that I did. And that earned me some quick cash that I could add to the pot, as it were, when I was just putting it together from whatever type of work I could get. It gave me a break sometimes from having to rely too much on gig economy jobs, and really filled in some gaps when I couldn't find contractual work. So, based on past work or people you know or things you've done in the past, you may be able to pick up work, especially if you have jobs like mechanic skills. Like, people may just be like, hey, I'll pay you X amount of dollars if you can install this thing for me. And some people have been able to harness this into their own little companies. Like, I met a woman who built a whole self-employment thing out of doing odd jobs while living out of her car, which she loved. Another short-term work commitment is temp work through a temp agency. Now, some temp agencies are very specifically themed to certain types of labor work or office work or something like that, and some are very general. But the thing is, there's a lot of temp hiring companies out there that basically have you on a list, and when they need somebody to fill a certain type of position, they will option you to go take the job. This gives you some freedom. Like if you turn down work too much, sometimes the temp agency will stop fooling with you because they won't feel like you're serious. Most people want temp to perm. So they see temp as a temporary fix to not having employment, and they see it as a gateway into companies that they would not either otherwise have. Sorry, I can't speak right now. I worked for a stage crew company that was basically a temp agency in the Bay. There were no long-term commitments. If I needed to be absent for a certain amount of time, I would just go to them and tell them that and be like, hey, I'm going to be out of town from this time to this time. As long as no work was already pre-scheduled in that time, they would not assign me to work. It was a lot of labor work. It was stage crew work. It was mostly, I hardly ever worked a show, which is why I kind of got frustrated with the company. I was hoping it would open up some doors for me that it did not open up. But we were basically most of the time the load in and the load out. So we unloaded the trucks, we left, and then we came back at the end when everything was over and we loaded the trucks back up. And it was a lot of work with like concerts and festivals and stuff like that. It wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't great. But it did provide a lot of regular work I would not have had otherwise. And all I had to do was wait for the call because they had all the contacts and they needed a certain amount of guys. They always said guys. And they would put those guys on the roster. Some of those guys were gals. And we went out there and we did the thing and then we left. And there was a lot of interesting work I did through that temp agency. I would say the next level up from gig work and temp work through a temp agency is seasonal work. The best examples of this in van life and RV living is basically the Amazon Camper Force and the Beet Harvest, and also camp hosting. These are commitments to daily work over a contractual period. I am including camp hosting in this, even though it's a little more remote and often not a city job. It's still a location tied job. Some of these seasonal jobs are very hard work, and for very long hours. But if you focus on banking the money and using it wisely, seasonal work can really give you a wonderful van life, where you give up some percentage of the year in a big chunk to be free for the rest of the year. Yes, you are location tied for a contract period, but it isn't forever. Other forms of this might be people who like work for a certain stadium during the baseball season, or something that only exists during the season of baseball. I kind of repeated myself there. What I have now with Oregon Shakespeare Festival is basically a seasonal job. I have no guarantees of work in the future. That would be beautiful, by the way. But I honestly don't know. I know I have work until October for this season. And my goal is to bank as much money as possible between now and the end of the season. And then allow that to put me ahead until the next big chunk of work I can get. That's the beast of working in the artistic field sometimes. So the next step over seasonal employment might be a part-time job. This could come with some advantages that seasonal work may not. Because you've reduced your expenses by not having rent and whatever other bills were attached to having that sticks and bricks dwelling, you now don't need as much money to survive. And if you just want more time off per week, more free time in general, depending on how your job schedules. Not all jobs schedule the same way. They might literally need you for like half the week or a week on and a week off, like depending on what kind of work you do or whatever kind of work you can find. And so the benefit of going to part-time work is there's just less hours that you are obligated to somebody else, where you can take your van and go wherever you want as long as you have the money to do it. And the reason why you're keeping some sort of job is to have that money. So there's a lot of people who can swing some sort of part-time employment to gain them the benefits that they want. With part-time work, you are more likely to have benefits. Sometimes with seasonal work, you will get benefits during the season that are either health insurance related or otherwise, give you some kind of bonuses, but it's very, very rare. It's more likely to happen with part-time work because you may be making a long-term commitment to the company, even at shorter hours. And so those benefits tend to exist a little more. I would say the exception with seasonal work is in the entertainment field, because most things are short-term or seasonal in the entertainment world. They're not long-term. You don't go work for a company generally unless you're like some office worker. You know, if you're the marketing guy, yeah, you might have like a long-term regular employment, but if you're an actor, that just doesn't happen normally. But anyway, the point is part-time work and sort of using it to your advantage. You may be happy with this because all you wanted to gain was more hours for you and less hours dedicated to the job, but you don't want to completely lose the security of your income. And finally, there's just having a regular old standard full-time job, full-time salary, full benefits job while living in a van. With the job landscape really permanently changed in a lot of ways after the pandemic, many employees in good standing have actually been able to turn their jobs into online work from home jobs, even if they weren't designed that way. Now, if you work in a warehouse, it's probably not likely going to happen. But if you are a desk worker who really could do the same work at home that you do at a desk, a flip might be possible. There are jobs that include travel. As I mentioned before, there's travel nursing. You do have to travel for work, but you don't get to control the location. Having an all-weather vehicle may make a difference in this kind of situation where you don't really have control of the destination. You're just going where the work goes. But in my work history, I used to work for this sandwich place called Potbelly. Now, this was pre-Vanlife, but I was a thing called a Dream Teamer. Now, a Dream Teamer was basically a regular employee at the sandwich shop, but when they opened new stores in new states, you were called upon to help train in the new stores. This was a promotion from just being a regular crew member, and it not only came with a salary raise, but there was a mileage reimbursement if you drove somewhere, or they paid for your travel if they had to get you there, and they gave you a hotel when you got there or some type of housing. And I fought to become one of these Dream Teamers when I found out it came with paid travel. I should have known the travel bug in me then. Now, eventually the company had enough stores that shipping people to different states just wasn't necessary and didn't make sense as a company expense. So I was only opening local stores, and I basically got bored with it, and amazingly that was around the time I went back to college. But my point is, this was a job where travel was a part of the package, and it could be used to satiate the travel bug while I had a wage-earning job. And not even a very, very special one. I was just a worker in a sandwich shop. That being said, there's also just working a regular old day job that has no travel attached. Banking that money that you would be giving to rent, and then using that banked money to go wherever you want to, whenever you can. Which honestly sounds great on paper. It sounds super simple, but may not work well for some in execution, because they would hate living in a car or a van without being able to be on a pretty mountaintop every day. That being said, location-based work is something I am doing right now. Right now, I am a production assistant for Oregon Shakespeare Festival and will be until October. And unless it's nearby or fits between rehearsal or show days, I probably will not do a ton of camping or traveling between now and the end of my contract. And I couldn't be happier. I don't really care. For me, and this doesn't mean it has to be true for you, but for me, a small travel radius or hardly any travel radius isn't the end of the world. But not being able to travel at all actually sucked. Way more than traveling small and within my budget when possible. Before Vanlife, if I wanted to go anywhere, I had to think about airfare and hotels. Now I can just go as long as I don't have work and I have the gas money. My primary goals, though, were always financial. Initially, I had some bad debt to dig through, in addition to housing costs just being beyond me, even for a rented room. So when Vanlife became an active choice I was making, it was not about finding the most epic travel locations. Having a home in the standard way just wasn't working. I was in a monthly panic about making enough money to pay rent, and if I didn't, getting kicked out. In van life, honestly, this is relaxed entirely. Like, even with a car payment during van life, I always felt like making that car payment and having enough money to pay for gas as long as I was working was achievable. Even if traveling all over the planet wasn't. When I was in standard housing, I never felt that way. So to me, having housing that was sustainable, that allowed me to travel when I could, even if it wasn't all the time, was a way better life than struggling every month to pay some other person to either live in their annex room or some apartment that wasn't worth the money. Especially since I was spending so much time out of it, trying to make enough money to keep it. Sorry, I'm getting a little frustrated, guys. Living in a van while working some sort of standard location-based employment isn't for everyone. Honestly, other people seem more obsessed with me going out camping than I am. For me, my priorities right now, while I'm a little bit still in a city-based, location-based job, is to save as much money as possible for the time I have off once this job is done, getting the box truck in the best possible shape I can before that, so using the money to improve my home, and that's it. I will get to travel when it's over. And that's okay with me. To travel in the gaps, work, and travel in the gaps. But that's not what everybody wants. If they can't have the whole shebang of van life, they just don't want it. And honestly, that's perfectly okay. Alright, that's all I got for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. And yes, I do have plans for those other polls I put out. Bye-bye. Huh, Mickey? You got a deal? You gonna stop attacking the mic stand? Huh? Thank you for joining me for yet another video. So what do you guys think? Would it be the worst thing in the world to just work a regular job while doing van life? Are you just not about that? Or are you like, yes, that's the most efficient way to do van life? Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, I got to take care of that YouTube business of reminding you there's a little thing called a thumbs up that if you like this video, it'd be great if you hit. And if you're not subscribed to this channel and you think it might be an interesting thing to subscribe to, you can do that as well. And also leaving comments helps me out with the algorithm. Basically anything you can do to interact with this video helps me out. So, you know, help a sister out. That felt really weird to say, like it didn't even have the right cadence. Well, anyway, I want to thank my supporters on Patreon and YouTube memberships. As always, you guys are amazing. I do Zooms with my Patreon members twice a month, and they do get short check-in videos on a sometimes frequent, semi-frequent basis. So if you want to join us over there, you can. If you can't, it does not matter. Anytime you watch my videos, you're helping support me, you're helping support the channel, and you are awesome just for doing that as well. I will see you in the next video.